WACT News begins now with breaking news.
More than 100 people removed from their homes just before the holidays.
Tonight, they're suing their town and others for millions of dollars in damages. The town of Holly Ridge is now being sued by a woman who lived in Holly Plaza, the low-income housing complex that is now closed because of mold. Brianna Paul filed a civil suit on behalf of her children and others who live in the complex. It names the town, the housing authority, the company that managed the complex, and contractors who did repair work.
Town leaders moved residents out of Holly Plaza last month to do mold testing on the units. Just last week, they abandoned plans to make repairs because of the costs involved. Town council then told residents that after January 1st, they had to find new places to live. Paul's complaint says, and here's the quote, "For an unknown period of time, these residents have been exposed to mold that defendants allowed to invade their homes to the point that their apartments are unrepairable. In addition to the disruption of their lives, the residents are suffering from personal injuries caused by exposure to mold." End quote.
You can read the lawsuit for yourself. It is inside this story on our website.